So Happy died literally just a few days ago, and she was housed at the Bronx Zoo for almost 50 years. We know that she was captured from her wild home and has been held in captivity since she was a youngster from, I think, 1971. And then she was brought to the Bronx Zoo in 1977. So throughout the years, she did have some company. Of course, an elephant in a zoo is never going to live the life that they should live, but at the very least, these profoundly social animals need to have company of their own kind. And various things happened over that time, and her companion Grumpy passed. And since that time, the exception, I think, of a very short period where they tried to socialize her with another elephant, she's been on her own, or she was on her own until her death. So that's 20 years in essentially solitary confinement in a city center zoo in the US, having been taken from her wild home, which somehow feels crueler than had she been born. Her experience is exactly the same, but there's just that element of, she had the opportunity to have that free living life, and it was just taken from her to turn her into an exhibit for people to gawk at the zoo.
And of course, people know her because she was the focus of the Nonhuman Rights Project lawsuit. Unsuccessful in the courts, but really very successful in a lot of ways in the press that really brought a lot of these issues into focus, but it didn't get her out of the zoo. And the other thing I think she's known for, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't she the first elephant to do the mirror test, the self-recognition mirror test?
To my
And
knowledge, yes. Yeah.
I noticed in the New York Times that it kind of portrayed her as exceptionally intelligent, but that's not true. Like she was extremely intelligent, but so are all elephants. But they happened to do the test first on her. I think they
Mhm,
put something on her head, and
mhm.
she looked in the mirror, and instead of touching the mirror, she touched her own
Right.
head, which is a way of demonstrating that an animal understands who they are.
Yeah, a sense of self. Yeah, they've used it on many different animals in the past. But yeah, she became famous for that. And it's interesting to see that play out now after her death, because you're seeing the headlines, the elephant who could be a person, and really highlighting that. But like you say, she wasn't exceptional in that sense, because elephants are hugely intelligent. I think one of the things, so obviously the Nonhuman Rights Project brought the case to try and grant her personhood, which is a concept, if your listeners don't know, then a legal person is something different than property. And animals are generally classed as property, which means they don't have the same rights as us. But a person in kind of normal life, we refer to a person, we often mean a human, but actually a legal person is somebody who has rights, and it can apply to human beings. It can apply to companies. It can apply to inanimate objects, but we haven't yet got to a point where it has been successfully applied to non-human animals. So the case was really interesting. Like you say, it wasn't successful. They didn't manage to get her personhood, with the idea of, if she had those rights, she had a right to freedom, and therefore she had a right to be moved to a more suitable environment. But like you say, we're seeing this come out again. It started a conversation which was incredibly important. And I know the Non-Human Rights Project didn't do that with the sense of it just being a messaging exercise. There's a genuine desire to get her out there, but it has been a really interesting messaging um, subject, because it was something that really got people to think about that, and what it means for animals to be property, and what it might mean for animals to be classed as persons.
Yeah, exactly. That's really true. And I mean, while they didn't do it just as a messaging effort, they did do it, I think, understanding that they probably weren't going to win right out of the gate.
Right.
And this is part of a long-term effort. And you saw, if you're familiar with the cases, they're fascinating to read how the courts struggled. They did not want to do this because
Mhm.
the implications were enormous, but they struggled and said some pretty odd things in the process. So it's like she was the focus of a lot of attention. But
Yeah.
there are many, many animals in zoos, and she was just one of them.